Hey guys, it's Mr. Hussey back here with a 6th grade math. Just a couple updates on your notes for today. I noticed, actually, thank you to, I believe it was Savannah and Maddie or Bria who brought it to my attention that there's a couple questions that spoke about the inverse property, which I never taught you. So let's just real quick look at the inverse property of addition and the inverse property of multiplication, and then that should help you on your homework questions. Homework question number 5, and then the back of homework question number 3, the bottom 2 components of homework question number 3. All right, so if you want to take a screenshot of this or just pause it for a second and write this down, you can. It might be good to add to your notes, but you don't have to upload this to me. So the word inverse from Oxford Dictionary means the opposite or contrary in position, direction, order, or effect. So when I think of the word inverse, I think of this word like the flip or the opposite. So the inverse property of addition, kind of like what we were doing earlier today, if you had P plus the opposite, which would be negative P, that would equal 0. All right, if you're doing it with numbers, then it would be something like 5 plus the opposite of 5. So 5 plus negative 5 equals 0. So that's what we call the inverse property, the opposite, the flip, the reverse, something like that. So in addition, you have to take the positive and add it to the negative of that thing, and it gives you 0. Okay, like 7 plus negative 7 would be 0. When we're dealing with multiplication, it's a little bit different. Okay, so let's start with the numbers first. If you had 5, the number 5, what would you have to times it by to get 1? In this case, it's 1, not 0, and I'll explain why in a minute. But if you had 5, you'd have to think of it as like, you almost have to think of it as like 5 over 1 times 1 over 5 is going to give you 1. So like the opposite of 5 is actually going to be 1/5 when we're dealing with multiplication. Okay, and the reason 5 times 1/5 equals 1 is if you break it down here, 5 really means like 5 over 1 or 5 divided by 1, because 5 divided by 1 is 5. It's just another way of writing 5. So 5 over 1 times 1 over 5. Well, 5 times, if you look top times the top, 5 times 1 gives us 5. And then on the bottom, 1 times 5 gives us 5. And 5 over 5 is the full amount of fifths. So 5/5 is 1. So the inverse of 5 is 1/5 when we're dealing with multiplication. But when we're dealing with addition, the inverse of 5 is negative 5. Okay. Now over here, if we had P, it'd be P times 1 over P is equal to 1. Okay, so that's just the inverse property of multiplication and the inverse property of addition. One of the students also asked me to take a look at a couple of these homework questions. So let's just real quick take a look at a couple of homework questions. In this case, the multiplicative inverse, okay, that's kind of what we just talked about. So 1/4 times 4 over 1. Let's think about what that would be. That would be like 4 on the top over 4 on the bottom, because 4 times 1 is 4, 1 times 4 is 4. So 4/4, that would just give you 1. And then also here the additive inverse, 9 plus negative 9, that's going to give you 0. Okay, so in terms of addition, we're looking at those two numbers making a 0. The inverses, the opposites, make a 0 when you add them together. Give a second for that to focus there. Okay, and then in terms of multiplication, we're looking for the opposite, that when you times it by the opposite, it would give you 1. Okay, so for instance, if you had like negative 3, then it would have to be a negative 1/3. okay, because the negative times the negative on the top gives you a 3, and then the positive times the positive gives you a 3, and that's a 1. So the inverse of negative 3 in multiplication will be negative 1/3. All right. So let's just take a look at number 5 on the homework too. Number 5 says describe how you know that 2 over 1 times 1 over 2 is equivalent to 1. What is the benefit to using this property? Okay, so we could say 2 over 1 times 1 over 2 equals, and then on the top, 2 times 1 is 2. On the bottom, 1 times 2 is 2. So 2 over 2 is 1. Okay. The benefit to using a property like this could be like if you had an equation, say it said like 1/2 of x equals 8. Okay. The benefit to doing this is that if you multiplied both sides by the inverse, so the inverse of 1/2, when we're dealing with multiplication, the inverse of 1/2 is 2 over 1 in multiplication. So to get rid of this 1/2 times x, I can multiply it by what we call the reciprocal. And if I do that to one side, I have to do it to the other. So 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 1 is 2. So basically over here we have 2 over 2 or 1. So we have this, a lot of teachers will cross this off. So we have 1x or just x equals. And then on this side, we have 8 times 2 is 16 on the top, and 1 times 1 is 1 on the bottom. So that's 16 over 1, which is 16. So the benefit of using this property is sometimes we can get rid of things in an equation that we want to get rid of. Like if we want to get rid of this 1/2 to solve for x, we can use what we call the inverse property of multiplication to get rid of the 1/2 by using 2 over 1 on both sides and then helping us solve our equation. Okay, so I hope that helps you guys on the homework, and it's good to add that to your notes, whether you put that in your notebook. I would suggest you still keep putting your notes in your notebook, or you just take a look at that and make sure you understand it. Maybe take a picture of it so you can refer back to it on any quizzes or tests. That would be great. Okay, so take care, guys. Have a good evening. Thank you.